What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of State of the Steelers. I'm your Steel Curtain Network host, Daniel, and I hope you guys had a fantastic week. We're getting closer to Latrobe. We're getting closer to training camp. I can't wait. I'm excited about it. It'll be our first glimpse into the new Pittsburgh Steelers for 2026, the reuniting of Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy, an offense that I think everybody at this point is pretty excited to see, especially given how lack of an offense or how lackluster of an offense the Pittsburgh Steelers have had over the last few years, dating back probably into maybe 2018, 2017 was probably the last time the Pittsburgh Steelers offense was a threat in the National Football League. And that was while Ben Roethlisberger was still in his prime, so to speak, or at least at the tail end of his prime. Now, we're excited. I'm excited. I'm fairly positive majority of the Steeler fans are excited about this upcoming year. Last year, the Steelers, albeit had a similar result as they've had for the last few years, a first-round exit. I mean, there's reason for hope. The offense kind of stuttered. They were better than what they had been, but they did stutter. And given the fact that you're reuniting Aaron Rodgers with Mike McCarthy, getting everybody on the same page, I believe they've had a pretty good draft. Obviously, we're going to have to wait and see how those guys, put it on the field. But I think everybody's expecting a better offense and maybe a better push forward. However, maybe perhaps we're not seeing some of the things that the rest of the NFL is seeing. And so today I wanted to break down some of those things because we have three stories that when you put them together raise a much bigger question about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Did the Steelers make the right decisions while rebuilding this offense, or are we beginning to see evidence that they may have miscalculated? So the first story comes from Seattle Seahawks on Sports Illustrated, which argues that Seattle may have won the DK Metcalf trade after all. I mean, obviously, if you're looking at it in a holistic view, the Seattle Seahawks won the Super Bowl, and the Steelers had a similar result as that they've had for the last few years, and the production was down on DK Metcalf. So one can argue that that's a pretty safe bet that at this point, that's the case. Now, it can still be rectified. If the Steelers go on and do something crazy and win something big, then it might be perceived as an even trade. But we're going to look at the trade and we're going to look at the outcomes, etc. The second comes from our former Behind the Steel Curtain, which says that George Pickens trade continues to look worse for Pittsburgh. And then to tie everything together, Pro Football Focus ranked Aaron Rodgers, the Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback, as only the 22nd best projected starting quarterback entering 2026. Now, what makes these stories so connected? The Steelers traded valuable draft capital and then gave DK Metcalf a major contract. They traded away George Pickens, who immediately produced at an all-pro level for the Dallas Cowboys. And then the veteran quarterback who's supposed to make this entire offensive plan work is now ranked at the bottom third of the NFL starters by PFF. Now, take that for what you will. PFF has had some interesting grades in the past. But today we're going to break down exactly what Pittsburgh gave up for Metcalf, what Seattle turned that composition into, what Pittsburgh received for Pickens, and why the Pickens trade cannot be fully graded yet, and whether ranking Aaron Rodgers 22nd is disrespectful or completely justified. So let's get into it. Hit the like button, subscribe, follow. You guys know what to do. Let's get into this. So first, let's talk about did Seattle win the DK Metcalf trade? We have to begin with the actual trade compensation because this is where we need to be specific. The Steelers acquired DK Metcalf from Seattle before the 2025 season. In return, the Seattle Seahawks received Pittsburgh's 2025 second-round draft pick, number 52 overall. The two teams also exchanged late-round selections when Pittsburgh and Seattle swapping 6th and 7th rounds. This is not simply Pittsburgh giving Seattle a random day 3 selection. The centerpiece was the 52nd overall pick, a valuable second rounder. But Seattle did not stay at number 52. The Seahawks used that selection as part of a trade package that allowed them to move up to number 35 overall, where they selected South Carolina defensive back Nick Imawari, a guy that I personally was hoping the Steelers were going to acquire in this draft. He's a safety, up-and-coming guy. I mean, he's described as a potential long-term pillar for the Seahawks defense because of his size, coverage ability, and physicality and versatility. But I mean, the guy's just a playmaker. I liked everything that I saw out of him, and I was hoping the Steelers would have gotten him, but instead they trade, away that pick, and obviously the Steelers would have had to have still moved up and things of that nature. But they gave Seattle the ammo to do so. Now, had the Steelers stayed put and kept George Pickens, would they have Been in a better position for Imanari, perhaps, but it's hindsight's 2020, right? So let's discuss how that changes how we talk about the trade. From Pittsburgh's perspective, the trade was DK Metcalf for a second round and a late round pick swap. The move on from Metcalf create more opportunities. This is looking at it from the Seattle Seahawks, position. They gave more opportunity for Jackson Smith-Njigba and used the Pittsburgh pick to acquire Nikumari. Then Seattle went on to win the Super Bowl while Pittsburgh was eliminated in the wild card round. That team's success does not automatically prove that Seattle won the individual trade, but it certainly strengthens their argument, if you know what I mean. But let's look at Metcalf's first Pittsburgh season. Metcalf recorded 59 receptions, 850 yards, 6 touchdowns, 99 targets. He also missed 2 games because of what do you call it? That whole situation with the player out in Detroit where he was sidelined due to the whole punch thing, which I think really hindered the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because if he doesn't do that, he ends up playing the next week against the Browns, I believe it's who it was. And if the Steelers win that, they don't have to play the last week. They could have allowed their players to rest. We would have saw an extended look at Will Howard. I mean, there would have been so many things went downhill because of that. But, when you look at the numbers, although they don't sound terrible, they're not up to, what we expected to get out of DK, especially with what they're paying him. 6 touchdowns, 850 yards. That's disappointing. They did not just surrender the 52nd pick. They also committed a 4-year, $132 million contract extension with an average of $33 million per season. And that's just not what that is. When you trade a high second round pick and give the receiver that kind of extension, you're not paying for respectable production. You're paying for, and you're expecting a true offense centerpiece. You're expecting someone defenses have to build their game plan around. You're expecting 1,100 to 1,300 yards, double-digit touchdowns, and a player who changes the geometry of the field. Metcalf's first year's production felt short on those expectations. The biggest question is why? Was it because Metcalf was underperforming? Was he underused? Was the quarterback unable or unwilling to consistently challenge defenses downfield? I mean, these are all questions we need to ask. Or, did Pittsburgh's offense structure, basically what I'm saying is, did Pittsburgh's offense structure fail to maximize, its most powerful, most expensive, and most dynamic weapon? I mean, the target number is especially important. Metcalf had only 99 targets. That suggests the problem was not simply that he failed to convert on a massive workload. He received the lowest target volume of his career. Now, again, he missed a couple of games, but also he didn't have anybody to help him, right? There wasn't a Jackson Smith-Njigba on the other side like he had in Seattle for the last couple of years. There wasn't a Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster on the other side to help work a little bit of the targets and stuff for both persons, right? We didn't get that with him. It was strictly just him, and the Steelers avoided the middle of the field like it was the plague. And so every bit of attention was on Metcalf. But again, before we should call him a disappointment, we should ask whether Pittsburgh gave him the correct opportunities is basically what I'm trying to say. Now, the quarterback situation. How does this affect it? Well, we're going to get into that right after the break. After the break, guys. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a few words from our sponsors. We'll see you on the other side. Hey, thank you for sticking with us. Before we get back into the conversation, I want to remind you guys of our website, SteelCurrentNetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Go check it out when you're done listening to us here. Become part of the conversation and create a profile and be in the comment section of all the articles. You won't be disappointed. Go check it out, SteelCurrentNetwork.com. All righty. So now, DK Metcalf's struggles last season kind of directly leads to Aaron Rodgers. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about PFF, and we're going to go more in depth on Aaron Rodgers in the third part of the show. I'm still talking about who won the trade between Seattle and the Pittsburgh Steelers on this. But PFF says that Rodgers' average depth of target last season fell to a career low of 6.6 yards, the fourth lowest mark among NFL quarterbacks. DK's greatest value is his ability to stretch the field, win vertically, and overpower defenses and turn contested situations into explosive plays. So if Aaron Rodgers needed to put the ball in some tighter situations there, maybe perhaps wasn't just doing that. If the quarterback is operating on the league's most conservative passing attacks instead, well, that can limit what makes Metcalf special. Metcalf can catch slant screens and intermediate routes, but you do not pay $33 million a year and trade a 52nd round pick because you need a possession, wide receiver. If you acquire DK Metcalf, it's because he can scare the safety out of the box and push single coverage down the field. We need to discuss the other half of Seattle's argument, though, the Jackson Smith-Njigba. So this is their argument on why they won. After Metcalf left, Njigba became a clear centerpiece for Seattle's passing attack. He led the NFL with 1,793 receiving yards and scored 10 touchdowns, kind of like what I mentioned before, with the yards and double-digit touchdowns that you're wanting out of your premier wide receiver. Njigba was able to perform in that manner. Now, Sports Illustrated in their article argue that moving Metcalf allowed Seattle to feature Smith-Njigba more, and also they didn't have to pay him. They avoided the $132 million contract and fully commit to Smith-Njigba as their number one option. Which obviously, when you see what they've done, winning the Super Bowl and what the kind of year that he had, obviously looks like that was the right move for them. Third, it uses Pittsburgh's second round selection to move up for Imuarmi. That's a strong return. You get Njigba operating at an all-pro level. You don't have to pay Metcalf, and you get to strengthen up your defense. That's pretty crazy. But let's not move too hastily after 1 year. Let's not be ready to declare Pittsburgh the losers forever. Metcalf is still under contract for multiple seasons. The Steelers did not make this move for just 1 year. If he produces, let's just say 11 to 1,200 yards this year, 10 to 11 touchdowns in Mike McCarthy's offense. Remember, it's different than the offense he was in last year. And let's just say this actually helps Pittsburgh make a legitimate playoff run. Then I would say this conversation starts to change. But after one season, obviously Seattle has clearly won the argument. Let's see. Well, I guess what my question is for Steelers Nation is, what does Metcalf have to produce in 2026 to justify, this trading contract? Is 1,000 yards enough? The season is extended. Bigger plays are on the horizon. Explosive plays are what you're looking for. Does he need more? Does he need 1,200? Does he need double-digit touchdowns? Or is this trade only justified if Pittsburgh finally wins in the postseason? Because with the money and the draft capital involved, ordinary regular season production is just not good enough, in my opinion. And then you have to factor in what it is that the Steelers had, when they did the trade. They had George Pickens, who is playing, on a franchise tag this year, who maybe perhaps isn't the biggest headache. Let me rephrase that. I think he was for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but he does seem like he's maybe, getting some right advice when it comes to this contract situation that he had going on in Dallas. But begs the question, did the Pittsburgh Steelers give up on George Pickens too soon? So, and this honestly is where the Steelers' offensive decisions begin to look even more uncomfortable. The Steelers traded Pickens to the Dallas Cowboys in May of 2025. Pittsburgh received a 2026 third-round pick and a future late-round upgrade. Specifically, Pittsburgh also received a 2027 fifth-round pick, while Dallas received a 2027 sixth-round pick. The Steelers used that 2026 third-round selection on quarterback Drew Aller. Therefore, Pickens' trade is not fully complete as a football evaluation. It's not merely George Pickens versus a third-round pick anymore. It's largely George Pickens versus Drew Aller, plus Pittsburgh moving up from the sixth round to the fifth round in the 2027 draft. If Aller eventually becomes Pittsburgh's franchise quarterback, no one will ever care that Pickens had a great first season in Dallas. A starting quarterback is more valuable than a starting wide receiver, in my opinion. If Aller becomes a high-level NFL starter, Pittsburgh could still win this deal decisively. But if Aller fails to develop and Pickens continues to produce like one of the league's premier wide receivers, this trade could become one of the most painful personnel decisions the current Steelers era. Because you have to factor in they had him, traded him away, and if Aller don't work out, they got nothing in return, maybe a backup quarterback. And in return, they go and get a trade for DK Metcalf, which resulted in Seattle winning the Super Bowl and the Steelers having a first-round exit like normal. I ain't gonna lie, guys, it don't look good. It don't look good, especially when you look at what Pickens did in his first season with Dallas. He had 93 receptions, 1,429 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. He was named second team All-Pro. League executives and scouts subsequently ranked him as the NFL's number 7 wide receiver in an ESPN survey cited by Behind the Steel Curtain. That's insane. He had a great year. Compare that with what DK had. 93 catches for Pickens, 59 catches for Metcalf, 1,429 yards and 9 touchdowns for Pickens, 850 yards and 6 touchdowns for Metcalf. Pickens produced 34 more receptions, 579 more receiving yards, and 3 more touchdowns. That's insane, guys. That's insane when you look at the comparison of what the Steelers are paying. Metcalf, they drafted Pickens. They had him on a rookie deal. Now, contract now, he was going to probably hold out and do some things. And location and sometimes a change of scenery does help. But and the scenery does make a difference. The two players were in different offenses, had different target volume, and played with different quarterbacks. So that also makes a difference. But it does make the Pittsburgh decision look mighty uncomfortable. Steelers essentially moved away from a younger receiver and acquired an older, dramatically more expensive one and watched the younger player outperform him by 600 yards. That's insane. But we do need to discuss why Pittsburgh traded Pickens in the first place. They did not question his talent. It wasn't his talent. It was obviously, I guess it was kind of on the field, maybe after the play type of stuff, off the field type of things that was going on. It was never his ability that was in doubt. The concern was whether Pittsburgh could trust the complete player every day and every week. I mean, there was also times where he was taking it looked like he was taking plays off and stuff. He was repeatedly also late for meetings and game day arrival times. I mean, we've heard the nightmare stories where he showed up, I think, eating some Skittles or something of that nature just before the kickoff. Which, I mean, it can make it difficult for us, the fans, who just see the spectacular catches that he's doing and hear only the stories of what's behind, or what's going on between Monday and Saturday, so to speak. But, was Pickens actually the problem? I mean, he was frustrated, right? Maybe that was because he was reacting badly to a dysfunctional offensive environment. Professional players are responsible for how they conduct themselves, and I agree. But Pittsburgh also had years of unstable quarterback play, probably more than 4. Conservative offensive design and inconsistent passing game production is an understatement. And then Pickens goes to Dallas, plays with Dak in a more dynamic passing offense, and immediately becomes a second team All-Pro. That should cause Pittsburgh to examine themselves, and I think they did. Maybe that's why Tomlin was like, "Hey, I need to step away. I need to go and reevaluate what it is that the NFL is doing today." I think he's been so involved in what he has done and perfected what he's done. He's not seen how the NFL has changed around him. And maybe this will be good for him. He'll get a year off. It'll be good for the Steelers. He wants to coach somewhere else. That'll be a first-round pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the future. Because in the end, like I said, Pittsburgh should examine themselves on this one. Because players, sometimes they fail because they cannot handle responsibility. Sometimes the organization fails to create the environment that allows the player to mature. Sometimes it's both of those things. But, and like I said, the most troubling part about that is that Pittsburgh did not retain Pickens and pair him with Metcalf. I think that would have been a different story. I was excited for that. I wanted to see that. I think everybody did. And, it was after the Steelers traded away Pickens, because there was a couple of weeks there that they were on the team together. And then Metcalf was going to wear number 4. All signs were pointing that Pickens may have been staying. it was a huge blow. I was disappointed. I understand that he was a headache, but I also understood that he gave this team the best opportunity to put on a productive uh, play on the field. But paying two receivers at the top of the market, now obviously he was still under a rookie contract last year. He's being franchise tagged, but paying two guys is difficult, which is why you ask yourself, did they make the right decision of trading away the younger guy for an older guy, including the capital that you used, and then had to pay him, $33 million a year average? I would say that after one season, it don't look good. After one season, it don't look good. And when it comes to Pickens, you got to ask yourself, did Dallas fix him? I doubt it. Or did Dallas just give him a quarterback in an offensive environment that Pittsburgh never provided? I mean, Pickens wanted to play for Aaron Rodgers. He said that, when he was asked, like, is there a quarterback that, you wish you could play for? And he said Aaron Rodgers. And that was before Aaron became a Steeler, et cetera. I think a lot of people think that maybe perhaps that dynamic personalities wouldn't have worked out in Pittsburgh with Aaron Rodgers wanting things at a certain way, right? If a player is lollygagging on a play where he's supposed to be clearing out the defense and it's not allowing to clear out of the defense and it's making for difficult throws for the quarterback, Rodgers isn't going to sit there and take that. Maybe that was part of the reason why the Steelers, got rid of him, because they knew what they were getting in Rodgers and they knew that marriage wouldn't work, right? However, maybe perhaps that's what Pickens needed, was that hard-nosed type of quarterback that's going to get in your face and make you accountable. Because the big question is, if Pickens would Pickens have produced 1,429 yards had he remained with the Steelers? My answer is probably not. But let's go back to Aaron Rodgers, and him being the NFL's 22nd best quarterback. PFF ranked Rodgers 22nd among NFL projected starting quarterbacks entering 2026. Before we get angry at the number, it's important to understand how PFF constructed their rankings. This is not intended as a ranking based on only career accomplishments. If it were, Rodgers would be at the top. Instead, PFF asked which quarterback its analysis would most want leading a team entering the 2026 season. The evaluation was based on 3 seasons of performance with passing grade, wins above replacement, and EPA per dropback serving as a foundational metric. I don't really like those metrics. Like PFF, but it's important to understand what they're doing and what they're saying. And basically what they're saying is that Rodgers is a 42-year-old quarterback, going to be 43 this year, and he's on his last year. One of those things, if you're thinking about retirement, you already are. And their argument is straightforward. It's Rodgers received a 68 overall grade, which was the lowest of his career. He had a 38.1 passing grade under pressure, ranked 6th amongst qualifying NFL quarterbacks. And his average depth of target fell to 6.6 yards, which is the lowest of his career and 4th lowest figure in the league. Maybe perhaps those numbers help explain Metcalf's limited target volume and production. Maybe it was Rodgers, not consistently playing aggressive or vertical football. And he also had a broken arm, and he also was maybe perhaps hampered by a limited left tackle for most of the season, in Broderick Jones. And I don't think he wanted to get hit. So he may have been getting the ball out pretty quickly. Now, he did avoid turnovers, and that's been one of his, staple point of his careers is avoiding turnovers. But as he's aged, his, avoiding turnovers has become more consistently, what's the word I'm looking here for? Conservative. It's making it extremely conservative and extremely predictable to a certain extent. And so, I think that may have been why the Steelers were, not doing so great. Now, let's look at the ranking itself. Rodgers was placed directly behind Kyler Murray at 21, immediately ahead of Daniel Jones. Is that insulting? I would say yes. He's no longer, going to be ranked as the 4-time MVP, but you got to put some respect on his name. But you also have the optimistic argument, which is Mike McCarthy. Rodgers and McCarthy have a history, familiarity, and an understanding of offensive football. McCarthy also knows what Rodgers prefers. Rodgers understands McCarthy's terminology and concepts. So I think it's a good match. I mean, when they were together, they won the Super Bowl, obviously against the Steelers. We'll see. I personally think that Aaron Rodgers is going to have a better season than last year. That's my final thought on Rodgers right there. But here are my final conclusions. These are not three separate stories. They're one story about the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive plan. The Steelers traded number 52 pick and exchanged late round selection to acquire DK Metcalf. Seattle used Pittsburgh's, pick and to trade up for Imawari and a clear path for Nick Jigba to lead the league in receiving, and they won the Super Bowl. Pittsburgh then traded George Pickens for a third-round pick used on Drew Aller, plus a future fifth for a sixth-round pick. Pickens immediately produced 93 catches, 1,429 yards, and 9 touchdowns while becoming a second-team All-Pro. Pittsburgh's new centerpiece, Metcalf, produced only 59 catches, only 850 yards, and 6 touchdowns during his first season. Obviously, a downgrade, in my opinion. And the quarterback responsible for maximizing Metcalf is now ranked 22nd by PFF after posting the lowest overall grade of his career, struggling badly under pressure, and recording a career-low average depth of target. But that does not prove that Omar Khan has failed. It just means that pressure is rising. Not just for Omar Khan, but for all these guys, in my opinion. Because for the Metcalf trade to work, Pittsburgh needs to use him like an elite weapon. They also, I think, have to win a playoff game. For the Pickens trade to work, Drew Aller eventually needs to become a meaningful starting quarterback. And for Rodgers, the decision to keep him here, Mike McCarthy has to create an offense that attacks more aggressively without exposing Rodgers to consistent pressure. Hey, if all three things happen, Pittsburgh's plan could still work. Metcalf could return to a Pro Bowl production. Aller could be the quarterback of the future, and Rodgers could deliver one final playoff run before handing over the offense to Aller. So my question for Steelers Nation is, what concerns you guys the most? Is it the possibility that Seattle won the Metcalf trade? I don't think anybody cares about that. It's more like, can the Steelers overcome their demons, right? But I will ask you this, is watching George Pickens become an All-Pro in Dallas, something, how did that make you feel? And lastly, is PFF ranking Aaron Rodgers 22nd, a suggestion the quarterback is already declining beyond recovery? I mean, if you look at his stats, they do go down. Let me know what you think. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us in the comments. I'm Daniel for State of the Steelers and Still Current Network. As always, here we go. We'll see you on the next one. On The Hangover, 9 p.m. with Shannon and Tate. See you guys there. Peace.